Reactor online. Sensors online. Weapons online. All systems nominal.
Hello and welcome to today's BattleMech review. Today we're going to be looking at the Black Python, or White Raven, or Viper if you're in the Inner Sphere. But not that Viper, this Viper. This one has multiple names for multiple reasons, mostly because the clans originally built it from Clan Steel Viper, and they went out of business. So the people who took them over was the Snow Raven, who rebranded it as White Raven. So there's different things, and the Inner Sphere, seeing it for the first time and not knowing what to call it, decided to call it Viper, even though there were already things called Viper roaming around. It's odd. The design itself looks a little bit odd if you're not used to them. It really looks like a jet fighter with legs and arms, but it's not a lamb, which would make sense in a way. It's fine. A lot of people pass up on it because the Timberwolf is far more popular, but it is quite an effective fighting machine and not super difficult to work on, as it is not an OmniMech. You have a bit of a simpler way of going around it, but it's harder to customize. All the standard, we've got the most basic body kit here shown on the cover. We'll see a few of the different ones that came throughout the years throughout this video. So let's get into it. Tactical and military analysts don't really like the name Viper for BattleMechs when they show up on various lists, or if you're looking at a battle report. Once you start digging into things, the name Viper can actually mean 3 different mechs in completely different roles and different configurations. The problem kind of comes from the disconnect between the Inner Spheres and the clan, but also due to the silliness of just how big the Inner Sphere is and just how long the history of BattleMech really ends up being. The Gargoyle is another example of how silly things can get, but the Viper is the one where there's really a problem. We'll start with the theme of this particular video with the Viper, which is the Inner Sphere designation for the Black Python, which became the White Raven recently. As with most of these BattleMechs, the Inner Sphere didn't know what they were actually called, so they found the name and tried to stick with it. That's why we remember things like the Mad Cat being the Timberwolf and the Summoner being the Thor and things like that. It doesn't happen quite as much nowadays, and even some people are more used to using clan designation for most mechs. It is random. Some people are more used to one, more used to the other, and it also depends on where you are in space, where things are going to be said. This Steel Viper design is a fast, heavy cavalry mech with very good combat potential. It's a classic battle mech and not an OmniMech, so it follows the trend of many of those clan standard machines. They might not be as benevolent as an OmniMech, but it's incredibly good on its own. But here's the kicker. Clanfire Mandrill had already built a thing called the Viper. That's what the Inner Sphere normally called the Dragonfly, because it eats bugs for breakfast. At 40 tons, it's an incredibly fast mech, and it's meant to be super mobile to be able to catch all sorts of things and blow them up. It also looks like a VTOL on legs, so it does share another thing with the Black Python, but otherwise it is a completely different mech. Unfortunately, Kallon also started building a mech called the Viper in 2832, right after the SLDF had taken their ball and went home. This one's an odd duck using a Crusader chassis upgraded to 70 ton instead of 65, which is meant to be an heavy brawler using one of the worst weapons in my opinion, the binary laser. I much prefer just stick a regular large laser in. It's not going to deal as much damage, but you're going to be far more heat efficient, which is quite important in the era this mech comes out, which is the early Succession War. I mean, you start losing the access to things like binary laser fairly quickly, because you lose access to things like double heat sinks, which is about the only way to make binary lasers work properly. The VP5 was a downgraded version that popped up every once in a while during the later Succession War using standard technology. It's kind of a blip on the radar. Most targeting computers will just say it's a Crusader rather than a Viper, unless it's one of the really weird ones from Kallon. Or if you were in the general vicinity where a few of those keep being found. So that's basically why whenever I get a waybill that says we need to fix a Viper, I get a conniption. I ask which one, and then they say, well, the heavy one. Well, which one? Because there's two of them that are heavy. And then the poor customer looks at me like I kicked his dog. I don't have to do this with most other mech, and it's quite frustrating, especially with Kallon having restarted the production on the VP series Vipers to rearm the RAF just before it collapsed. Worse, there's some people that just say the good one, and I have to give them the look. They're all good enough. None of them are really that bad, except maybe the VP one. I don't like binary lasers. There's ways to fix that, though. So I could say that all of them could be the good one. That's probably part of why I generally say Dragonfly instead of Viper to talk about the 40-ton land mech. So today we're going to be talking about the good one. No, not that good one. That good one. Never mind. The Black Python is an early clan invasion design from Clan Steel Viper because they needed to bolster their forces after not being invited to the party at the very start. This changed a little bit later on when Ulrich Kerensky took charge. So when they brought this 75-ton machine, it was meant to challenge things like the Timber Mad Cat Wolf for supremacy in that particular range. It's not an OmniMech, so it's not as easy to configure, but it basically matches the Timberwolf in a lot of ways. It goes the same speed with a 375 XL, giving it a top speed of 86 kilometers per hour, and it also has jump jets, making it far more mobile than most variants of the Timberwolf. You get 11 tons of ferrofibrous plating, which is perfectly fine, and an endo steel chassis in order to save weight, and it gives you very decent protection for a mech in that range. Is it the best armored? No. Is it the fastest? Well, at that particular range, to go faster, you would need an XXL engine, which is never a good thing, or a mask and supercharger, which are good, but they take up space. This is in that particular Goldilocks zone there, where it will be able to do most of what it's meant to do, and able to challenge mechs that are more expensive or a little bit fancier than it is. Where there's a bit of an issue is that you only have 13 double heat sinks, and it's not quite enough on a mech like the Black Python. Your main weapons are a pair of large pulse lasers, that's 20 heat generated, so that's already a good chunk of those 13 double heat sinks, and you're backed by a pair of medium pulse lasers at closer range. So you basically, if you move and shoot all of your big guns, or well, medium guns, you are going to start to run hot. At even closer range, you get 4 small pulse lasers to carve up mechs and infantry. If you really shoot everything, you're in trouble. But this is a very decent bracket firing kind of setup, and since they're all pulse lasers, they're going to be very accurate. If that wasn't enough, you also have 2 machine guns to make sure that unarmored threats are really, really scared of you. And those 2 will not be generating heat, so you should be able to shoot them all the time. On top of all of this, you get a targeting computer, improving the accuracy of all of your weapons, even though you can't do precision shots with them, coupled with a short-range targeting system in the built-in equipment that's better than usual. So if you get close to a Black Python, you will die. That's what those things are literally meant to do, and probably partially responsible for what the Steel Vipers are known for, which was to be extremely aggressive and getting in your face, even though they, well, weren't kicking and punching you a whole lot. The idea was pretty good, the chassis was working, so the Steel Viper made an upgrade to it in 3052. This one was more meant for sniping rather than brawling, and changed the weapons around a little bit. The bigger guns are replaced with an Ultra AC2 for some reason, and a pair of ER large lasers. Those are really good. And you're still cooled by only 12 double heat sinks, which is a little bit tight. At closer range, you add an extra small pulse laser, once again for some reason, and you're protected by an ECM. This one I'm not a huge fan of. Honestly, Ultra AC2s are lackluster at best. I'm not sure if it would have been kept around. I've really seen very few of those. The Mark III was released in 3066, and it started to take advantage of some of the new technology. One jump jet is actually taken off, but the armor is buffed up to 12 tons. Maybe they could have taken off all of them, but let's leave it at that. The main guns are replaced with a pair of heavy large lasers, improved in some very rare cases for massive short-range punch. You get 17 double heat sinks to try to manage that heat even more, but heavy large lasers are just that heat intensive that it could be a problem. The later Mark IV takes out the machine guns and replaces them with an ER medium laser, which is a good idea because then the ammo won't go off if you overeat too much. The Mark V was apparently first seen in 3055, but I think it was a one-time kit at that time. This one is also spread out a little bit and to be used as a dedicated sniper, where your main guns are now a pair of ERPPCs and you got a Gauss rifle to back that up. Where it kind of hurts is that you only have very limited heat sinks, so you won't be able to shoot everything all the time. But then again, one ERPPC and a Gauss rifle shot every phase is going to be pretty efficient. The Mark V does keep the machine guns to take out infantry if required as well, which makes it a fairly balanced unit. I do think it's a decent setup on that particular chassis. There might be things I would move around once again, try to get some of those extra heat sinks in. But if you were, you'd have to probably take out the Gauss rifle. It gets complicated at that time. While the design was still around, nobody was really building it anymore after the Steel Vipers basically decided to self-delete by starting the War of Reaving, which basically destroyed them. Clan Snowraven did grab the production specs of the design and decided to mess with them in order to produce their White Ravens. The biggest change on those, at least the original version, is that it has now 14.5 tons of ferrolamellar plates, was technically the first production mech using ferrolamellar, making it extremely well protected, and you have 16 double heat sinks to keep you decently cool. The main weapons on your White Raven are a pair of ER large lasers with the common pair of medium pulse lasers to back it up. At closer range, you get 4 ER small lasers backed by a pair of AP Gauss rifle, which are a little bit better than machine guns. They're not as ammo efficient, but I prefer them in most situations. Everything is still tied to a targeting computer. You're going to be able to do those precision shots now, since most of those weapons are not burst fire. It's very decent. It's going to be fairly tough. You're going to be able to use most of your weapons decently well with that 16 double heat sinks. Overall, a fantastic upgrade to a classic. And then the Snow Ravens kind of went crazy. The Mark II of the White Raven uses an XXL engine and 8 improved jump jet to be able to jump 240 meters and still go 86 kilometers per hour. At that point, it gets pretty crazy. The armor is standard with the 13 tons of plates, and you get 10 double heat sinks, which will not really dissipate the heat you're going to be generating from both the XXL engine, always run hot, and all the weapons you put on there. So a pair of large pulse lasers, a pair of medium pulse lasers, 4 ER small lasers, and that targeting computer to guide all of that. I much prefer the Mark I, probably just because I like tougher mechs in general. When you're going to be dealing with an XXL engine, you should always be using ferrolamellar or Arden armor, because it gets way too risky to run that big of an engine on something that uses, well, standard plates. Standard plates are decent at coverage, and even ferrofibrous is going to be very good at protecting your mech, but there's always a chance something goes through. Ferrolamellar and Arden armor kind of mitigates that even more. So, yeah, I'm honestly not sold on that Mark II. The Black Python, White Raven, Viper, whatever you decide to call it, is what happens when you give a budget to someone who's deciding to build a second-line unit. It will generally work incredibly well in all sorts of situations, but never in one specific one like an OmniMech normally can. With OmniMechs, you can just decide like, okay, tomorrow we're going to be fighting in a desert, so I'm just going to be bringing a bunch of ballistic weapons. The day after, oh well, we're dropping in the middle of an ice storm. I'm going to be bringing a targeting computer and some pulse lasers in order to warm myself up because I'm going to be freezing. You can decide what you're going to do every other day. With a Black Python, well, you have a Black Python. It's going to be good, and it's going to be able to do all sorts of things, but it's going to be doing that thing. Some of the variants are very good. You sometimes have a bit of minimal rebuilding you could mess around with, maybe remove the machine guns to put more heat sinks in, something along those lines. But even there, it's very minimal what you can rebuild on them and what you should rebuild on them. Could we make an Omni Python? Quite likely, and I think it would be a very interesting thought experiment, but it would probably require a decent amount of money, and I'm not sure people are ready to dump that kind of money on an older design when you can try to invent something brand new. So I hope you guys have a very nice rest of your day. I thank you very much for listening to me for so long, and I will see you guys later. Bye-bye.